Spring practice has concluded. All the spring games have been played, and that means it's time for Uncle Lou to update his top 25 ranking. I only do 3 off-season. I know we're not supposed to say that word. Rankings. I do one after signing day, which I did back in February. I do one after the spring practices and the spring games, which you're about to see now. And I do one final preseason ranking a few weeks before the season starts. I know some people do them, every other day, it seems like, or once a week, and I get why they do it. They do it because people will click on it. But I just don't think enough changes week to week during this time of year to really justify changing rankings up constantly. So I do the 3. This is going to be the second one. So if you're mad or pissed off about where your team falls on this ranking, don't worry. I will update it again towards the end of the offseason, a few weeks before the games actually start. What I want to do is start by putting my post-signing day top 25 ranking up on the screen now. Again, this is the one I did around the middle of February after the signing day in February. So you see it on the screen there, and we're going to start now to update that. We'll start at 25, and we'll work our way all the way down to number 1. Coming in at number 25, I did not have this team in the rankings back in February, and I'm giving Brent Venables and Oklahoma a little bit of the benefit of the doubt here. There is absolutely nothing that happened last season from Oklahoma that leaves them deserving of a top 25 ranking heading into 2023. This is pure conjecture on my part. They had some injuries. I know about the quarterback situation. Dylan Gabriel's coming back. I do think that's good news. I like Jackson Arnold, the freshman they brought in. But I think it's going to be Dylan Gabriel unless he gets hurt again. And I just find it almost impossible to believe that Oklahoma's defense is going to be bad again next season. I completely understand what Brent Venables was left with on the defensive side of the ball there when Lincoln Riley left, which was next to nothing. I get it. I did not expect Oklahoma's defense to be as bad last year as it was. It was really, really bad. Brent Venables is a great defensive mind. Now, I know that even year 2, he doesn't have the talent at Oklahoma that he had when he left Clemson. I get that. I just find it almost impossible to believe that defense is going to be as bad in year 2 under Brent Venables as it was last season. I also think a couple of the teams that had really good seasons in the Big 12 last year are going to have not quite as good of seasons this year. I think Oklahoma wins a couple of those games that they lost last year. I'm putting Oklahoma in my preseason ranking, post-spring practice edition, at number 25. They're new to the ranking. They're the only team. I believe they're the only team in this. Updated top 25 ranking that was not in my ranking back in February. And one team, of course, that means one team had to fall out. That team was UTSA. I had UTSA in my top 25. And I still think UTSA could finish the season ranked to the top 25. I think they're going to be a really, really good group of 5 team in 2023. But I've got Tulane at 24. They had an amazing season last year, just absolutely unbelievable season after going, what were they, 0-12 or 2-10? I think they were 2-10. 2-10, turned it around, won their conference, made a New Year's Six game, and beat Southern Cal was that the Fiesta Bowl? Fiesta Bowl or Cotton Bowl? I'm drawing a blank on that. Anyway, a great game. Southern Cal doing Southern Cal things, or more specifically, Lincoln Riley doing Lincoln Riley things. Defense completely let Southern Cal down in that game. They just couldn't stop Tulane, especially in the second half and towards the end of that game. And Tulane ends up with one of, if not the biggest wins in program history, beating Southern Cal in a New Year's Six game last year. The quarterback comes back. They had a lot of pieces coming back. I think Tulane could be good again in 2023. I've got them at 24 in my updated post-spring ranking. At number 23, I've got South Carolina. South Carolina is difficult for me for a couple of reasons. I feel about the same way about South Carolina heading into this coming season as I felt heading into last season. Now, of course, they proved me and a lot of other people wrong last season in terms of overall record, particularly with those last 2 wins of the season that they picked up at home against Tennessee and on the road at Clemson. They finished the regular season by beating those 2 top 10 teams, kind of an out-of-nowhere type of situation. A lot of momentum that created for South Carolina heading into the offseason. They had some transfer, some people into the transfer portal that kind of surprised me. I don't like that they lost the running back Marshawn Lloyd. I think that's a good pickup for Southern Cal. I don't like that they lost the tight end, Jaheim Bell, as he ended up at Florida State. It seems like they lost a couple of weapons on offense. They get Spencer Rattler back, And if you're a South Carolina fan, you got to hope that he has a better season. And look, I get it. Yes, you beat Tennessee. Yes, you put up 1 million yards and scored 1 million points. You turned around the following week and beat in-state rival Clemson. And Spencer Rattler played good in both of those games. Over the course of the season, I don't think Spencer Rattler played very well. I don't think he was very consistent. He was very up and down. There was some games in particular where he looked really, really bad. At one point, about halfway through the season, he had the worst QBR of any quarterback in the SEC. He's got some work to do, and he's going to have to play better in 2023 consistently over the course of the season than he did last year. Now, obviously, if he comes out and plays every single week like he played against Tennessee, South Carolina will have a successful season. But South Carolina's schedule, once again, is just extremely difficult. If you looked at last year, yes, they beat everyone's expectations in terms of overall record, but that includes a win against a Texas A&M team that was top 10 in the preseason last year that everyone thought was going to be really, really good and had South Carolina penciled as a loss in that game. That's one extra win South Carolina picked up, right? And then we talked about beating Clemson and Tennessee to close out the year. That's another 2 wins that Carolina kind of picked up that no one expected and was completely out of the blue. It's hard to imagine them winning all 3 of those games in 2023. Will Texas A&M be as bad as they were last season? No, I just don't see it happening. They're way too talented. They're going to be improved somewhat. Will they be able to beat South Carolina in 2023? I think that'll be an interesting game. South Carolina got them at home last year. They got to travel out there this year to play them. Last year was the only time South Carolina has ever beaten Texas A&M, and they play every single year. So that's a tough game. And then, of course, you got Tennessee again, also on the road this year. You beat them at home last year. Clemson, you do get at home. South Carolina would have to win those 3 games to match what they did last year. So I don't think that's going to happen, at least not in all 3 cases. So you have to start looking at games South Carolina lost last year that they can make that up this year. The Florida game comes to mind. South Carolina got absolutely blown out by Florida in one of the weirdest games of the season. That was right before they beat Tennessee and Clemson. South Carolina lost, I believe it was 38-0 or 38-6, something like that, to Florida. The next week they beat Tennessee. The week after that they beat Clemson. That looks like a game maybe Carolina could flip from the loss to the win category in 2023. They also, of course, are going to have to play Missouri and Kentucky. Those are 2 games they're going to have to win, right, if they want to try to get close to accomplishing in terms of wins what they did last year. They've got the Georgia game early in the season on the road in Athens, a likely loss. There, in my opinion. So we'll see. But I've got South Carolina at 23. If they overperform like they did last year, then they will finish inside the top 20, maybe even top 15-ish type team. If they end up losing this year to Texas A&M, Clemson, and Tennessee, who they beat last year, and still lose to teams like Florida or Mizzou or Kentucky or whatever the case, they'll finish outside of the top 25. But I've got them at number 23 in my post-spring ranking. I do like what Shane Beamer's doing there. You look at the recruiting rankings at South Carolina under Shane Beamer have improved every single year he's been there. So, I do expect some gradual improvement over time from South Carolina, but once again, just a brutal schedule. I've got them at 23. I've got UCLA at number 22. Chip Kelly out there in control of the Bruins. Best season last year they've had in a while. They lose their quarterback, DTR, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. They bring in a highly rated freshman. I wouldn't be shocked to see him starting. They brought a transfer in too, but so interesting quarterback situation for Chip Kelly out there at UCLA. There's going to be a theme when you hear me talk about all of the Pac-12 teams that are ranked. The Pac-12 is a really good conference. I know people like to crap on the Pac-12. I know they're kind of embarrassing themselves publicly going through this TV deal negotiation that's kind of playing out for everyone to see, and no one really wants to give the Pac-12 any money. The reason no one wants to pay the Pac-12 is not because the Pac-12 is terrible from top to bottom. No one watches it, and I get it. And a lot of that is the Pac-12's fault, right? They did have several years in a row where they were really bad, top to bottom, pretty much. They've had some mismanagement at the top in terms of some decisions they've made. The TV times haven't made a lot of sense. So I get it. Not a lot of people are watching the Pac-12. I think that should change. If you're a college football fan who enjoys college football, I think you should make it a point to watch some Pac-12 football. I did my best to get people to watch last year. The Pac-12 was must-see TV week in and week out last season. I think it's going to be the exact same this year. You've got 5 or 6 teams within the Pac-12 that are all at least good. 2 or 3 of those teams, I think, have a chance to be great in terms of playoff contenders in November. I don't know that UCLA falls into that category. I don't expect them to compete for a playoff spot in 2023, but I do think they're a good team. I think they're a legitimate top 25 team, and I think they're one of these teams in the Pac-12 that's worth keeping an eye on. I've got them at number 22. At number 21, I've got North Carolina. They got Drake Mays as a Heisman candidate coming back at quarterback. lit the world on fire last year. He can run around, he can throw. They lose all of their wide receivers from last year, and they keep Gene Chizik as defensive coordinator. So losing the wide receivers, bad. Keeping Gene Chizik, bad. Their defense was absolutely horrendous last year. It's hard to find blame with Drake May. He was a true freshman last year, and yes, he made some true freshman mistakes. But if he gets better, year 1 to year 2, a complete season's worth of experience under his belt, North Carolina should have a pretty good offense yet again in 2023. Again, knowing they have to replace a few of those wide receivers. The defense is what has to take a giant leap forward. A lot of people like to talk about Tennessee's defense and Southern Cal's defense. North Carolina's defense, in my opinion, was worse than both of those last year. North Carolina didn't get the attention that Tennessee and Southern Cal got because they weren't as highly ranked, they weren't as talked about, that kind of thing. But North Carolina's defense was absolutely horrendous. It's going to have to get better if North Carolina wants to do anything other than be a borderline top 25-ish type team. Even though I do think Drake May could find himself in New York for the Heisman ceremony at the end of the year based on numbers alone. It's hard to pick him to win the Heisman right now because I just don't think North Carolina as a team is going to have the type of record that we typically see from a Heisman winner, and it's most likely going to be the defense's fault, but I've got them at 21. At number 20, I've got Wisconsin. There's a few teams on this list that I'm kind of going out on a limb on. I think Oklahoma is one of them. Again, there's no real concrete reason or evidence you can point to have Oklahoma at 25. It's just kind of a feeling that I have. It's the same thing with Wisconsin. They were not good last year. They fired their head coach. They shipped their quarterback off to Gainesville. Luke Fickell comes in. I've got a couple of explanations on why I have Wisconsin ranked at 20, even though they were so bad last year. I don't expect everyone to agree with me on any of these teams, actually. But you don't have to agree with these reasons either about Wisconsin. But when you look at the Big Ten West, it's just an absolute shit show. There's not one legitimately good team in the Big Ten West, in my opinion. I honestly believe that. I don't think Purdue is good, and they won the Big Ten West last year, okay? I don't think Iowa is good. Wisconsin was not good. It doesn't take a great team out of the Big Ten West to get to 9+ wins. It just doesn't. The division is so bad overall. Anything with a pulse or a heartbeat, I believe, is going to give you an opportunity to win that division at 8, 9+ wins. I don't see any reason why Wisconsin can't be that team. I think Wisconsin's got just as good of a chance of winning the Big Ten in 2023 as any other team in that division, including Purdue, Iowa, Nebraska with new head coach Matt Rule. I like Luke Fickell. I think Luke Fickell was the best head coaching hire of the offseason. We'll see how he works out at Wisconsin. We all know the success he had at Cincinnati. He transitions now to the quote-unquote Power 5 head coach of Wisconsin. He's in the weaker of the two divisions. The Big Ten West. I don't see any reason why Wisconsin can't make a run to win the Big Ten West, and if that happens, I think they'll be ranked within the top 25. I've got them at number 20 in my post-spring top 25. 19, Texas Tech. Texas Tech is another team that I will admit I don't know a ton about in terms of being able to name their players or anything like that, but Texas Tech was a really good team last year. I watched several Texas Tech games last year by accident. I'll just be honest. There wasn't one single Saturday morning last year where I woke up and I said to myself, I need to watch Texas Tech today. But I ended up watching a few Texas Tech games because of who they were playing. And Texas Tech was a really good team last year. Again, not great. We know about TCU last year. We know about Kansas State, kind of the storylines of the Big 12 last year. But Texas Tech was a really good team. They beat Texas last year, and you're going to say, well, a lot of people beat Texas last year. Texas Tech was a good team. And they're going to be a good team again in 2023. They host... Is it Oregon they host early in the year? That's going to be a great game. A great game. And when you see people picking Texas Tech to win that game, don't be surprised. I think Texas Tech may be an underdog in that game against Oregon at home early in the year, but I think it's going to be a trendy underdog pick. Not a lot of people know about Texas Tech. Not a lot of people talk about Texas Tech, whereas everyone knows about Oregon. Texas Tech definitely has the ability to beat Oregon earlier in the year. That's going to be a game to watch early in the season. I've got Texas Tech ranked at 19 in my post-spring top 25. At number 18, I've got TCU. This is a team it's hard for me to put my finger on, really. An obvious Cinderella story last year, undefeated in the regular season. They lose to Kansas State in the Big 12 title game. They make the playoffs, beat Michigan, and then the Georgia game happened. They lose Max Duggan. They lose Quentin Johnston. Those were their two best offensive players. They also lose Garrett Riley, the offensive coordinator, brother of Lincoln Riley, to Clemson. Sonny Dykes is still there as head coach. They bring in Briles to run the offense. I just don't think TCU can repeat the success they had last year. And to sort of beat a dead horse into the ground here, if you remember last season, one of the things people talked about with TCU, other than their record, was how do they keep winning these games? It seemed like every time you watched TCU, they were losing in the second half, and they would come back and they would win at the end. I just don't. I don't think for a team like TCU, who, let's be real, you're talking a team that has borderline top 30 talent on their roster, right? I don't think a team with that talent level, I don't think that's a repeatable formula. There's a reason Max Duggan was in New York for the Heisman ceremony last year and came in second place. And it's because he just had something magical about him in the second half of those games. That's gone. Quentin Johnston is gone. They're both off to the NFL. I just don't think TCU is going to repeat what they did last year. I also don't think they're going 4-8. I think Sonny Dykes knows what he's doing as a head coach. He proved that at SMU. He's proving it at TCU. I just think the reemergence of Texas in particular, I think Oklahoma being a little bit better. I think Kansas State's going to be a good team again this year. I already talked about Texas Tech. I just don't see TCU beating all of those teams. And then you got the 4 new teams that have entered the Big 12, right? They've expanded. They've now got BYU, Cincinnati, Central Florida, and Houston. So you have 4 wild cards there where it's an unfamiliar opponent. I just don't think TCU is repeating what they did last year. I do have them in the top 20, sort of a sign of respect for making the playoffs last year and beating Michigan. I don't think they're a top 10 team in 2023. I've got them at number 18. And to be fair, they weren't even in the top 25 in last year's preseason ranking, not just mine, anybody's. So just because I have them 18 or somebody else has them wherever they have them doesn't mean TCU can't repeat what they did last year. It's just that I don't expect that to happen. I've got TCU at 18. I've got Oregon State at number 17. Oregon State, like Texas Tech, is a team that no one pays attention to, no one seems to talk about. I'll be honest with you, outside of quarterback DJ Uiagalelei, who they brought in from Clemson, our buddy to ukulele, I can't name their roster top to bottom. But I know they're good. They won 10 games last year for the first time in like 16 years. They've got the head coach there, knows what he's doing. He's got them turned around. It's an unbelievable turnaround. He inherited a 2-win team. Now he's winning 10 games. This is Oregon State we're talking about. And he won 10 games at Oregon State last season, not in a season where the Pac-12 was terrible, like I mentioned. Probably the best season the Pac-12 has had in about 8 years. Washington and Oregon made the playoffs in back-to-back years back in 14 and 15. Last year was probably the best year the Pac-12 has had overall since those 2 years. And Oregon State still managed to win 10 games in 2022. I think they're a legitimate top 15-ish type of team heading into 2023, and I've got them ranked. Where do I have them ranked? 17. I think that's a fair ranking. Number 16, I've got Utah. This is a team that I am backing off of a little bit. I'm a huge fan of their quarterback, Cameron Rising. But he's hurt. He blew his ACL out in the bowl game. He's been, the surgery, recuperating, all that kind of stuff. He didn't participate in spring practice, didn't participate in the spring game. They're not even 100% sure he will be ready to go by week 1 of the season. And, of course, they host Florida Gators in week 1. Utah is a team that I'm kind of sliding backwards in my top 25 ranking. No disrespect to Utah at all. They've been one of the most consistent teams in all of college football over the last 10 years. They have benefited more than any other team in the Pac-12 by the Pac-12 being down. I'm not convinced Utah has gotten all that much better in the last 10 years. I just think the Pac-12 has gotten worse in the last 10 years. Obviously, we saw the fall of Southern Cal. Oregon and Washington are kind of up and down. Outside of last year, Oregon State and UCLA had been pretty irrelevant. The Arizona schools, people forget they even exist. Stanford has been bad for a couple of years in a row. Cal is Cal. So I'm not disrespecting Utah. Like I said, I think they're one of the most consistently good football teams and programs in the country. But I think they have been a big beneficiary of the Pac-12's decline over the last 10 years. And now that the Pac-12 is starting to climb back up, I just think Utah is going to kind of get lost in that mix. They just don't recruit on the level of some of these other teams, particularly Oregon and Southern Cal. And I just think it's more a case of these other teams kind of catching up and passing Utah. It's not that Utah's getting any worse, although losing that tight end is going to be impossible to replace. I just think the other teams are getting better. I think Utah is going to be a casualty of the Pac-12 getting better. I don't think Utah is going to continue to win the Pac-12 year out of year. I mean, they've won it the last 2 years. Utah had won the Pac-12 2 years in a row, made the Rose Bowl 2 years in a row. I don't expect that to continue in 2023, although I think they're too well coached and too consistent to just completely fall off the map. I think they're a legitimate top 20 team in 2023. I've got them at 16. I've got Kansas State at 15. I think this is a team that a lot of people aren't going to talk about outside of, well, they lost Deuce Vaughn. Yeah, they lost Deuce Vaughn, but this is another team similar to Florida State that has been patient with what I think is a good head coach and a good coaching staff. Chris Kleiman, who they brought in from FCS school, was at North Dakota State or whichever one it was, brought in, didn't have the immediate success that a lot of people had maybe thought or hoped that he would, but has steadily improved over time, and last year ended up being a really, really good team. In fact, winning the Big 12. They knocked TCU off in the Big 12 title game. I expect Kansas State to be a really good team again in 2023, even though they lose Deuce Vaughn. I don't know that Kansas State will repeat as Big 12 champions, but I think they might have a say in who does. I think they may end up knocking someone out of the Big 12 title game late in the year. Who knows? Maybe they even get back to the Big 12 title game in 2023. I'm not convinced of that, but I do think they're going to be a good team and a legitimate top 15-ish type team in 2023. Clemson, I've got at 14. I've got questions about Clemson, and some of it has to do with the roster and the talent on the field or lack thereof. Some of it's got to do with the turnover at the coaching staff. A lot of it's got to do with Dabo Swinney and his – I know I say this all the time, but he just seems, to me, unwilling to kind of embrace the new college football. And you don't have to like it. Whether you're a fan, if you're a fan, you don't have to like it. If you're a coach, you don't have to like it. The difference is if you're a coach and you don't like it, you still have to participate in it. His sort of feelings on the transfer portal, his sort of philosophy on recruiting, like, if you don't recruit to Clemson when you're in 10th grade and swear off every other school, then we don't want to have nothing to do with you type of. I just have what I think are some legitimate questions about Clemson. Not that they're going to start going 6-6. Clemson is still going to be a really good team. They're the most talented team in the ACC, and they've got a very good chance of winning the ACC again in 2023. And I'll go out on a limb right now and say that I believe Clemson is 100% making the playoffs in 2024. So I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea about what I'm saying. If you're saying, what are you talking about 2024? 2024, the playoffs are expanding to 12 teams. I don't really see a scenario where Clemson doesn't get in the playoffs once we go to a 12-team playoff. I don't really see that scenario anytime in the immediate future. There's a handful of teams you can say that about, right? Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, Michigan, Clemson. These teams are going to be in a 12-team playoff for the foreseeable future. Clemson's there, but I just don't know. Well, I do know, actually. They are not where they were in 16, 17, 18, 15, 16, 17, 18, even 19 and 20, really. There is no Deshaun Watson. There is no Trevor Lawrence. Those are irreplaceable players. Cade Klubnik has been good. I think Will Shipley might be the best overall football player in the ACC. He's definitely the best running back in the ACC. He's really, really good. But where are the wide receivers? Where's the lines of scrimmage? They lost half their defense to the NFL. They don't have Brent Venables anymore. They've got their second offensive coordinator in 2 years. Florida State is on the rise. Clemson could win the ACC in 2023, but they're not going to be the overwhelming favorite to win it in 2023 like they have been every year for the last 8 or 9 years. That's going to go to Florida State. But Clemson could, of course, still win the ACC. I've got them at number 14. Number 13, I've got Texas. This is another team. It seems like I do this to myself every year. I pick Texas higher than anyone else. I think Texas is going to be really good in 2023. I wouldn't be shocked at all if they win the Big 12. I think they're going to have massive improvement in terms of their overall record. I think Quinn Ewers is going to have an amazing year. I think they've got maybe the second best wide receiver core in America. Their defense is going to have to play good in some key games this season if Texas wants to get where they want to go. But I think Texas is a legitimately good team. I would not be surprised at all to see them hovering around the top 5 come the end of the year and in contention to win the Big 12. Now, I say a lot of this almost every single year and I end up getting proved wrong during the season when Texas craps the bed and loses 4, 5, 6 games. And then I say, that's it. I'm never doing this to myself again. I'm not picking Texas to do anything until they prove they can do it. And here I am again. I'm buying what Texas is selling. I think Steve Sarkisian knows what he's doing, particularly offensively. Their recruiting is just absolutely ridiculous. They've got Arch Manning for down the road, but this is going to be the Quinn Ewers show this year. And like I said, their wide receivers are just absolutely ridiculous. I think they're going to score a lot of points. I think they're going to win a lot of games. I've got Texas at 13. And if you held a gun to my head, I would pick Texas right now to win the Big 12. I've got Notre Dame at number 12. I was impressed with Notre Dame offensively after the spring game. Now, I've watched Sam Hartman play for the last couple of years at Wake Forest and put up ridiculous numbers. Now he's going to have to go to Notre Dame and do it. And we'll see how that translates, right? Notre Dame's not in a conference. They do play some tough games. I mean, they got Southern Cal, they got Clemson. They play Ohio State early in the year. So in terms of Notre Dame overall as a team, I still think talent-wise, they're behind the elites of college football overall talent-wise. They're behind the Georgias, the Bamas, the Ohio States, the Michigans, the Southern Cals, at least on offense. But they're going to be a good team again in 2023. There's a lot of Notre Dame haters out there. I don't particularly like Notre Dame. But the idea that Notre Dame's not any good or that Notre Dame doesn't play anybody, that's just not necessarily true. Notre Dame has consistently been a top 10-ish team and top 5 team in a couple of years consistently over the last 10 years. They made the playoffs a couple of times. Believe me, I know they can't win a playoff game. They can't win a major bowl game. I get all that. It's been 30 years since they've done any of that. I get it. But if you think Notre Dame's going 6-6, I mean, I just don't know what's wrong with you. Outside of 1 year where Brian Kelly was like 3-9 or whatever it was, that was 5 or 6 years ago, it seems like. They win 10, 11 games every single year in their sleep. I don't see any way they won't do it again in 2023. It's going to be tough against, your Ohio States, your Southern Cals, your Clemsons. Those are going to be tough games. But even if they lose all of those games, it's hard to imagine Notre Dame being worse than 9-3. Sam Hartman is a huge Sam Hartman's going to be the best quarterback Notre Dame has had that I can remember. I mean, Notre Dame is going to be a good team again in 2023. They're a borderline top 10 team, in my opinion, and could definitely finish the season within the top 10 if they win some of those key games against your Southern Cals, your Notre Dames, etc. Number 11, I've got Tennessee. Look, Tennessee could be 6. Tennessee could be 8. Tennessee could be 11. I've seen Tennessee at 14. Replacing Hendon Hooker, right? And their 2 best wide receivers. I don't think it matters. Tennessee's offense is a giant gimmick, and it's plug and play. If you've got a quarterback who understands the offense, if you've got offensive linemen and receivers who are capable of getting up off the ground and snapping the ball 3 seconds after the previous play ends, Tennessee's going to put up a lot of numbers over the course of the season on offense. It's a gimmick offense. They run plays while the other team is still on the ground, and they score a lot, and that's going to continue. Joe Milton is Stetson Bennett's age now, 25, 26 years old. He's been in college since 2018. So all the jokes you made about Stetson Bennett last year, you can now make them about Joe Milton. The difference is Stetson Bennett's got 2 national championship trophies and a visit to New York for the Heisman ceremony. Joe Milton doesn't have any of that. It never will. Tennessee's not winning the national title. Their defense is the problem, and it's going to continue to be for them in 2023. On top of that, they got to play at Alabama this year, whereas they got Alabama at home last year. Tennessee's biggest win since the 90s, beating Alabama. They got to travel to Tuscaloosa this year and play that game. They do get Georgia at home, but Georgia has figured out the Josh Heupel gimmick offense. In 2 years against Josh Heupel, Georgia's defense hasn't given up 30 points total. I mean, I think they've scored 2 touchdowns in each game they've played against Georgia. 2 last year, 2 the year before. For whatever reason, Georgia's got it figured out, whether it's talent, whether it's coaching, whether it's scheme, whether it's Tennessee just showing up and knowing they don't have a chance. I don't know. Now, the game is in Neyland. That'll be Georgia's toughest game of the year for sure, on the road in November. Tennessee, it's hard to imagine Tennessee beating Georgia, but even if they do, you've all seen Georgia's schedule, who we'll talk about later in this video. Georgia's schedule is a joke. I'm a Georgia fan, and I will admit it's just a joke. Now, a lot of that's not Georgia's fault. Georgia has to play the teams in their division. They don't have a choice. They've got to play Vandy. They've got to play Mizzou. They got to play Kentucky. They got to play Florida. They got to play South Carolina. They got to play Auburn. Those are the teams they have to play every single year. And then the SEC tells them who else they're playing from the SEC, which this year is Ole Miss. So play Ole Miss at home. The non-con, the Oklahoma thing is what it is. I've made several videos about it. I think if Georgia really wanted to play that Oklahoma game, they could have played it. I'm not buying the whole SEC made them cancel it deal. But the point is, even if Georgia were to lose that game, even if Tennessee beats Georgia on the road in Knoxville in November, that's likely to be Georgia's only loss. You think Tennessee's running the table with only 1 loss? Probably not. They're probably looking at a 10-2, 9-3, 10-2 type of season again. We'll see. I think Tennessee is a legitimately good team. They've got miles to go on defense, and I'm still not sold on that offense being anything more really than a gimmick. We'll see. But Tennessee will be a good team. Their offense will put up ridiculous numbers. They'll have a good ground game again. They do have to replace Hendon Hooker and their two top wide receivers, Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman. But like I said, it's sort of plug and play there because the offense is so gimmicky. I think they're gonna blow out the majority of teams they play. It's just that simple. The majority of the teams Tennessee plays are going to get tricked by that offense again. Just the way it is. I've got Tennessee at number 11. Now into the top 10. I've got Southern Cal at number 10. Let me say something about 10, 9, and 8. They'll just do it all at the same time. I got Southern Cal at 10, Washington at 9, Oregon at 8. Put them in any order you want. I can't figure it out. I'll just be honest with you. If you go back and look at the rankings, well, they're on the screen. You can see them now. But if you look at the rankings I did right after signing day, these were in a different order. I had Southern Cal the highest ranked out of those three. And then I believe I had, I think I had Southern Cal the highest ranked, then Washington, then Oregon. So I've kind of flipped it around a little. I've got Southern Cal at 10. It's defense, and they play Notre Dame. That's really what it is. It's defense, and they got to play Notre Dame. I still don't trust Lincoln Riley's defense. I'm going to have to be proven wrong. Now, I think getting Bear Alexander is a huge deal for Southern Cal. A huge deal. I did not want to lose Bear Alexander. As a Georgia guy, Bear Alexander was going to be our best interior defensive lineman this year. He played as a true freshman. You have any idea how good you have to be to play significant snaps in meaningful games, during meaningful times of meaningful games at the University of Georgia and Kirby Smart's defense? You've got to be really, really good. And Bear Alexander played a ton in every single game last year. I hated to lose him. He immediately becomes probably Southern Cal's best player on defense, in my opinion. A future first-round draft pick, I think, along the defensive line in the NFL. I don't know why the hell he went to Southern Cal, to be honest with you. An elite defensive player going to Southern Cal makes about as much sense as a five-star quarterback coming to Georgia. Just makes no sense at all. Southern Cal is going to be great on offense. Caleb Williams, returning Heisman winner. They're going to have a bunch of NFL wide receivers. Their running back should be good. Again, I mentioned getting Marshawn Lloyd from South Carolina. I like him. I think he's really, really good. He's got to stay healthy. It's the trenches in the defense that concerns me about Southern Cal, particularly over the course of the season. As good as Bear Alexander is, some teams have 15 Bear Alexanders or 15 defensive players as talented as Bear Alexander. Southern Cal doesn't. Injuries on defense could derail Southern Cal's season. Some of their defensive numbers last year weren't as bad as they or some of Southern Cal's defensive numbers last year, I think Southern Cal's defense was worse last year, even than the numbers indicate, is what I'm trying to say. I've talked about this before with the turnover situation. Southern Cal led the country in turnovers last year. On the positive side, I mean, defensively, right? I don't think that's not a repeatable stat. It's just not a repeatable stat. Too many balls bounced Southern Cal's way last year. Tip passes that were intercepted, that kind of thing. That's not repeatable season to season. It's just not. I'd be willing to bet anybody who wants to make the bet that Southern Cal will not lead the nation in turnovers for a second year in a row. In fact, I would make that bet about any team year over year. There's too much luck that's involved in turnovers. Yes, a defensive back can make an amazing play and pick the ball off, and there was some of that for Southern Cal last year. A defensive player can strip the ball and make a good defensive play, and there was some of that last year for Southern Cal. When you have as many turnovers as Southern Cal had last year, I'm forced turnovers on defense last year. Some of those are luck. Some of those are the running back drops the ball and it bounces that way to a Southern Cal player instead of bouncing that way back to the offense. A pass is tipped at the line of scrimmage and falls right into the hands of a line. That kind of thing. There is always some luck involved over the course of the season when it comes to turnovers. I don't think that stat's repeatable for Southern Cal. Their defense is going to cost them a game at some point. But they could 100% win the Pac-12. They could even make the playoffs. Southern Cal could even make the playoffs. It would not surprise me or shock me at all. We've seen Lincoln Riley do it time and time again at Oklahoma. Southern Cal's a legitimately good team. You want to tell me I'm wrong for having them at 10? That's fine. Move them ahead of Washington and Oregon if you want to. It's not going to hurt my feelings. I'm not even going to argue with you. I think one of these three teams right here is winning the Pac-12, Southern Cal, Oregon, or Washington. I've got Southern Cal at 10 in this version of my top 25 ranking. That puts Washington at 9 and Oregon at 8. These are the three best quarterbacks in the Pac-12 here. These three teams are all going to average 40 points a game. I think Washington has probably got the best defense of the three. Oregon's probably the second best defense. Oregon's probably the most well-rounded. Bo Nix has got to stay healthy. He got hurt at the end of the season last year for Oregon, and that just derailed any chance they had of winning the Pac-12, making the playoffs, anything. People forget Oregon was a playoff contender heading into November last year. Their only loss was Georgia. Bo Nix was in the Heisman conversation. Then he got hurt towards the end of the season, and it kind of just came apart, right? these three teams are all going to have good years. I wouldn't be shocked at all if they all three finish the season in the top 10, but they're all three at least going to finish in the top 15. I've got them all in the top 10 right now. Southern Cal 10, Washington 9, Oregon 8. You're going to see a rematch in the Pac-12 probably when it comes to the title game. They don't have divisions anymore, so we'll see how that works out. Does the title game end up knocking somebody out of the playoffs? That's what happened last year in the Pac-12, right? If Southern Cal beats Utah in the Pac-12 title game, Southern Cal's in the playoffs, not Ohio State. But that didn't happen. Southern Cal crapped to bed again defensively, and Utah won the game, knocking Southern Cal out of the playoffs and putting Ohio State in. Will that happen in the Pac-12 again? Could one of these three teams find themselves in the Pac-12 title game with 0 or 1 losses? If that's the case, all they got to do is win, and they're most likely in the playoffs. We'll see if one of them can pull it out. It's been a long time since we've seen a Pac-12 team in the playoffs, and honestly, the Pac-12 needs it bad. They need it real bad. After that, number 7, FSU. FSU has got potential to be the FSU that we are all used to watching growing up if you're my age. This is the closest I have seen Florida State to being elite since 2013, 2014, the Jameis Winston years. They are really, really good. They return almost everything, including quarterback Jordan Travis, another Heisman candidate quarterback. Some key pieces on defense. They cleaned up in the transfer portal. And the schedule sets up pretty good. I mean, they got LSU early in the year. That's going to be a huge game. A huge game. And beware of the overreaction, too, when that game is played. Whoever loses that game, people are going to laugh at them, call them terrible, knock them out of their top 10. LSU and Florida State are both top 10 teams. Now, they're going to both be top 10 teams when that game is played, and they're both going to be top 10 teams when that game is over, in my opinion. There aren't 10 teams in the country better than LSU or Florida State, either one, period. That's going to be a hell of a game. I can't wait on that one. And then they play Clemson in the regular season. Outside of those two games, Florida State should win every other game they play without a problem. They'll be a significant favorite in the other 10 for sure. So worst case scenario for me is Florida State at 10-2, and that's going to mean a trip to the ACC title game. Like the Pac-12, there's no divisions in the ACC anymore. And even if they lose to LSU, that's a non-conference loss. That doesn't count towards determining who plays in the ACC title game. So if Florida State could lose to LSU, lose to Clemson, they're going to be sitting there at 10-2. Only one of those two losses will be a conference loss. They're going to be in the ACC title game, probably playing Clemson. In fact, that's what I expect to happen. I expect Florida State and Clemson to meet twice this year. Once in the regular season, I believe that game is at Clemson, and then again in the ACC title game, which is played in Charlotte. But Florida State has a chance, an opportunity, and the potential to go as far as they want to go this year, including the college football playoffs. They're probably going to have to beat either LSU or Florida or Clemson in the regular season if they want to make the playoffs. I don't know. If they go 10-2 and lose to LSU and Clemson, even if they turn around and then beat Clemson in the ACC title game, I don't know if that would be enough to get them in. They'd be sitting there at 11-2. It's going to depend what happens with all the other conferences and, of course, what happens with Notre Dame, right? If I'm Florida State and I'm trying to make the playoffs, I'm telling myself we got to go 11-1 and win the ACC championship game. That should be the goal. I know everybody wants to win every game and go 100-0, and there's nothing wrong with having that as a goal. But realistically, Florida State probably needs an 11-1 regular season and then a win in the ACC title game if they want to make the playoffs. I've got them at number 7. I've got Bama at number 6. Look, this is a team that whatever you thought about Alabama before the spring game, you have to think less of them after. That's not me hating Alabama. That's not me throwing shade. That's not me making fun or trash talking. If you thought Alabama was the best team in the country heading into spring, you have to think a little bit less of them coming out. If you thought they were the 15th best team before spring, you got to think a little bit less of them now. I had Alabama around 4 or 5 in my February ranking. I bumped them down to 6. It's not like I threw them out of the top 10. It's not like I'm on here saying I think Alabama's going 6-6. But their quarterback situation is an absolute mess. There's just no other way to describe it. We have seen Jalen Milroe play during the season in meaningful games, and he looked terrible. We were then told all spring that he looks amazing at practice, and even if he's not, Ty Simpson is good to go. Then we all watched the spring game, and we all saw they were both terrible. Neither one of those quarterbacks looked good in the spring game. And, oh, it's just a spring game. That's all we have to go on, buddy. That's all we have to go on. You know who else watched the spring game? Nick Saban, Tommy Rees, and the rest of that Alabama offensive staff. They also watched the Alabama spring game. And what did they do the minute that spring game ended? They went and got a quarterback out of the transfer portal. So it's not just Uncle Lou or trolls on the internet who think that Alabama has a quarterback problem for 2023. It's the Alabama coaching staff to go out and get Tyler Buckner, who was benched multiple times as a starter at Notre Dame by Tommy Rees, just proves that, idiots like me aren't the only ones that think there are some issues in Tuscaloosa offensively. I do like Justice Haynes, the true freshman running back. I think he'll have a great year. I think you're going to see Alabama go back to kind of the ground and pound, play, control the clock, time of possession, keep the other team off the field, play good defense. I think Alabama's going to try to go back to that. Will it work in 2023? Well, it depends what you think work means. Can they beat LSU at home? Now, this is something that works in Bama's favor. They do have to play on the road at Texas A&M, but other than that, their three toughest games are all at home. They play Texas at home early in the year, they play LSU at home, and they play Tennessee at home. If you look at the games they lost last year, LSU and Tennessee, those were on the road. You look at some of the games they almost lost at Texas. They did almost lose to Texas A&M at home. That was the Jalen Milroe game. So they have a scheduling benefit this year that they didn't have last year, in that they get some of their more difficult games at home. But I don't know. I have more questions about Alabama heading into 2023 than I have had about Alabama heading into any other season since Saban got there. They're very talented. They've got the most talented roster in the country, top to bottom. If you go back and look at the talent ratings on 24/7 that are based off recruiting classes and transfer ins and outs, they're going to have the most talented roster again. But they don't have a single wide receiver that anyone worries about. They lost their best two players on offense last year, Bryce Young and Jahmyr Gibbs. They lost the best player on defense, Will Anderson. We'll see. But I think the days of Alabama getting off the bus and other teams going, well, we're not winning this one, I think those days are over, at least for this season. I don't know of any legitimate top 10 team that looks at Alabama and thinks they can't beat them. Right, so we'll see how it pans out this year, but I've got Alabama at number 6. They looked worse to me in spring than what I thought they would look heading into the spring, so I bumped them down a spot or two. I've got Penn State at number 5. Here's another one of these teams that I'm out on a limb on. And I've heard some people say, people say this about Penn State every single year. I don't say this about Penn State's not one of these teams. Here's Michigan, Texas, Miami. Those are 3 teams that I've been out in front on what seems like year after year, and got proved wrong year after year after year. Now, Michigan turned it around, made the playoffs each of the last 2 years, but there is a few teams that it seems like every year I'm higher on them than everybody else, and I get proven wrong. Penn State's not one of those teams. I get that maybe there are some people out there who have been pumping up Penn State for a couple of years just to get let down. That hasn't been me. It's going to be me this year, though. I think Penn State's going to have a really good year in 2023. I will admit that I would have liked to have seen more from them offensively in their spring game. They've got a new quarterback who everybody's high on, Drew Allar. He was actually there last year and played a little bit behind Clifford. He's a big kid with a big arm, very highly recruited. Penn State fans have been excited about him for a couple of years now. He's going to have a good season. Their running game is going to be great. I think their defense is going to be great. They're going to have the first or second best defense in the Big Ten, I think. Maybe Michigan ends up with the best defense, but Penn State's right there with them. Drew Allar is going to have a better year than Clifford ever had if Penn State wants to get over the hump and beat Michigan and Ohio State, their 2 in-state rivals, and try to win the Big Ten and make their first ever college football playoff. But under James Franklin, I think this is the best chance they've had in a couple of years to do that, and I've got Penn State at number 5. I moved Ohio State up to number 4. This is an area, you might find this hard to believe, but me and Ohio State fans actually disagree about something. I watched the Ohio State spring game. I came away going, they're going to be good. They're going to be good again. Ohio State fans were jumping off bridges and jumping out of windows. I don't get it. You can make arguments that Ohio State's the best team in the country and should win the national title. If their defense improves a little, it's going to be hard for anybody to beat them. Anybody. Their offense is going to be ridiculous. I don't care who the quarterback is. Find me a year at Ohio State where quarterback was an issue. How far back do you have to go? 10 years? It doesn't matter who the quarterback is there. They had one guy out for the spring, so they got two guys competing for it, Devin Brown and Kyle McCord. I don't care which quarterback gets the starting job. I really don't. They've got 4 probably first-round NFL wide receivers to throw to. They've got a Heisman candidate running back who is probably the 3rd best running back in the Big Ten and probably the 4th best running back in the country just because the Big Ten's loaded with running backs. You got Corum and Edwards at Michigan. You got Singleton at Penn State. Travion Henderson at Ohio State is right up there with them. Their offensive line should be fine. It's hard to find a weakness on Ohio State. They're absolutely loaded. These Ohio State fans were clutching their pearls after the spring game. I don't get it. Ohio State should beat the soul out of Notre Dame early in the season. The talent discrepancy is ridiculous, top to bottom. Ohio State should absolutely destroy Notre Dame. Now, I thought that last year too, and they didn't. They beat them 21-10. We'll see what happens this year. Early in the year, Ohio State and Notre Dame. And then they've got the Michigan game at the end of the year. You can go to sleep between there. Other than, maybe the Penn State game this year. If Penn State ends up being anywhere close to what I think they can be. Ohio State should absolutely boat race everybody else they play, not named Michigan and maybe Penn State. They're going to be in the playoff discussion. They got to play at Michigan at the end of the year, and it's a huge game. They've lost to them 2 years in a row. We all know the storylines there. Ohio State's going to be really, really good. Really good. I've got LSU at 3. This is the one where I could be very, very wrong. Now, I think LSU is going to be really good. Obviously, I've got them ranked number 3. They've got 2 quarterbacks coming back from last year that both played a lot, and in my opinion, both look really good and both can be really good. They got Jaden Daniels, who's kind of the athletic runaround guy. Not that he can't throw the ball, but he's more of an athlete type of guy. And then we've got Nussmeier, who is not the, sort of the opposite. It's not that he can't run around, but he's sort of more known for his passing ability. If Jaden Daniels' throwing increases or gets a little bit better this year, I think he's the better of the 2 options to go to because he does do things with his legs that stress a defense, right? Speaking of defense, they got probably the best linebacker in the country. Is it Perkins? Is that his name? They get Mason Smith, I think, the defensive lineman back from injury. They've got NFL wide receivers. Secondary concerns me a little bit about LSU, and the LSU man's going to type in the comment section, well, we have this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy. Great. I'm sure they're all going to be first-round NFL draft picks and future Hall of Famers. I'm just telling you, if I'm looking at LSU's roster position group by position group, the defensive backs are the position group that I probably worry about the most. But I think LSU is going to be really, really good. Year 2 in Brian Kelly, usually you see a team take steps forward in year 2. Kirby Smart being an obvious example of this. You look at his first year in 2016, and then what did he do in 2017? Made the national, won the SEC, made the national title game. Brian Kelly played for the SEC title last year in his first year at LSU. A big surprise to a lot of people. Beat Alabama. You know what they've got to stop? You know what LSU has to stop? They lost by 40 points to Tennessee at home last year. You can't do that. You can't lose by 40 to somebody. That can't happen. And then the loss to Texas A&M. And I'm not even saying necessarily Texas A&M, but a team like that. How do you beat Alabama? How do you find yourself in the top 5 or 6? How are you playing for the SEC championship? How are you making a New Year's Six bowl? But you lose to Texas A&M, the worst Texas A&M team we've seen since they joined the SEC over a decade ago. How are you losing at home to Tennessee by 40 and 50 points? That game was over 10 minutes into the game. That you got to stop. That you can't have that. You can't have that again. But I think LSU is going to be really, really good. Talked about it when we did Florida State earlier, but that game against Florida State early in the year, and then, of course, they got to travel to Tuscaloosa. They play Florida. They've got Texas A&M, the Mississippi schools. So not an easy schedule, but, if you're a top 5 team, it should be a schedule that's manageable. LSU is going to be some people's pick to win the West. I don't know if they'll be the official pick when the media puts their picks out in July, but this definitely isn't going to be a year where everyone is picking Alabama to win the West like you see most years. I think a lot of people are going to be high on LSU. I'm one of them. I think they have the potential to have a really, really good year. And then I left Michigan and Georgia at 2-1. Michigan and Georgia, to me, were the 2 best teams I saw play in the spring. That doesn't mean anything for the regular season. This isn't a regular season ranking. This is a ranking as of today, okay? What did teams lose after last year? What coaches did they lose? What coaches are they replacing? Who'd they replace them with? What kind of recruiting class did they have? How did spring practice go? Did they have any key injuries? Who'd they bring in from the portal? Who'd they lose to the portal? And how'd they look in the spring game? It's no one thing. This isn't a ranking of spring games. This is a ranking of everything I have seen and know about these teams up to and including the spring games, okay? So I had somebody tell me last time, how can you base a ranking off of a spring game? I'm not basing a ranking off of a spring game. No ranking is based off of any one thing at all. Everyone's ranking is based off of all the information they have about that given team, their schedule, everything I named, who'd they lose, who's coming back, who are the coaches, all of that stuff. You put it all in a pot, you stir it around, and you say, okay, I think Florida State's going to be ranked 7th in my ranking right now. I think I'm going to have Michigan at 2. I think I'm going to have Georgia at 1. I think I'm going to have South Carolina at 23. That's it. That's it. So, again, you don't have to agree with these, but I think Michigan and Georgia were clearly the best 2 teams I saw play in the spring. Michigan's absolutely loaded, just absolutely loaded. Lines of scrimmage, check. 2 elite running backs, check. Quarterback that impressed last year, check. Best defense in the Big Ten almost every single year, check. Made the playoffs back-to-back years, won the Big Ten back-to-back years, beat Ohio State back-to-back years. Just a lot of positive things for Michigan heading into 2023. And they get Ohio State at home. And their non-con schedule is a complete fucking joke for the second year in a row. All these people that keep talking about Georgia's non-con schedule, go look at Michigan, okay? This is their second year in a row. Michigan doesn't play a single non-conference Power 5 opponent. Not one. Not one. Now, Georgia Tech is terrible. We can't help that. They're an in-state rival, okay? We're going to play them every year. They're a Power 5 team. You don't have to like it. You can cry about it. You can keep saying, what about Oklahoma? What about Oklahoma? What do you think would happen if Georgia played Oklahoma this year? What do you really think would happen? Georgia would beat them black and blue. We'd beat them like they owed us money. Look, if Georgia went and played Oklahoma this year, and we'd beat them by 40, right? And then what would y'all be saying? Look at Lou bragging about beating Oklahoma. Lou, Oklahoma's terrible. Why are you bragging about beating Oklahoma? But now since we're not playing Oklahoma, look, Georgia dodged Oklahoma. Look, why would we dodge a terrible team? We can't help it that Georgia Tech's bad, but they are. But at least that's a Power 5 opponent that Georgia plays. And give me a break. Georgia has played a home-and-home with Notre Dame. We played Clemson a couple of years ago. We played Oregon last year. Georgia schedules big-time non-con games every single year. It didn't work out this year. We had to move Oklahoma because they're joining the SEC and all the schedule shit that's going on. And while I disagree with it, I understand why it happened. Anyway, y'all done got me mad. I got to go. Have a great day.